Good evening, friends, and you are watching Weekend at 5 with me, Navdeep Kaur Marwa. Hope you're having a good evening. Today, in a special episode, we are going to talk about the border announcement that took place yesterday. Yesterday, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced that from 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, which is April 12th, Australians will be able to travel to New Zealand isolation free. And from 11:59 p.m. Sunday, May 1, vaccinated travelers from visa waiver countries and those who have valid visitor visas will be able to arrive in New Zealand. While this news has delighted a lot of people, including the tourism industry who was waiting desperately to borders to reopen, but it has also added stress to many Kiwi Indians and other people who wanted to reunite with their families. Since India is not a visa waiver country, the opening of arrival of tourists from there will not take place in April but in October, as was announced earlier. The news has disappointed a lot of people who are saying that there's lack of decision making regarding non-visa waiver countries and there's lack of consideration for reuniting families who have been waiting to meet each other for more than 2 years ever since the pandemic hit. We have with us former immigration minister and immigration expert Delamere Tuariki to talk to us about the announcement, his take, and lots more. Welcome to the show, sir.
Good evening, Navdeep, and greetings to all the listeners.
Yes. Good evening, sir. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, very, very well.
Right. So to begin with, yesterday's announcement, what is your take on the announcement? It has created a lot of emotions, happy, sad. So as expert, what is your take on that?
Well, first, Navdeep, I think people need to realize that immigration is driven by politics and political realities for the government of the day.
Yeah.
And yes, yesterday's announcement would have caused a lot of happiness for a lot of people, and I understand a lot of anguish for those who missed out. But if you go
Mhm.
back to 28th of, no, the 30th of September last year, 2021,
Yeah.
when the minister announced that if you were in the country the day before and had the eligible visa, you will probably be able to get residency. And right then and there, tens of thousands of people were ecstatic, including many, many thousands of Indians, people who were never going to qualify for residence under any of the existing categories. But of course, there are many of those who are here feel very hurt because they did not meet the category, the announcement, and I understand that. And
Hmm.
same as yesterday. But look, the one thing we all know that has driven immigration policy for the last 2 years has been COVID.
Right.
And that has always been the bottom line. And while I don't always agree with the government and a lot of things, including immigration,
Hmm.
all I have to do to convince myself that the government has by and large got things right is I look at the death rates for COVID.
Right.
New Zealand is far and away the lowest death rate per million of any country in the world outside of some very small Pacific islands mostly and some African countries where they don't count the numbers,
Right.
and so in that sense government has done a fantastic job. But yes, they've fallen down a number of areas, and I don't agree with everything. And I do understand the anguish of those people in New Zealand, the parents, fathers, mothers, and their husbands, wives, and children are stuck back overseas, um, especially in India. But
Hmm.
look, I think what they should be happy about is the border is reopening. So
Right.
finally, there is light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, it's not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be May. Right now, it's October. I think that they will probably come forward unless there's another lurking COVID disaster.
Right.
But yeah, look, the angst, the anguish of separated families. It's a terrible, terrible thing to happen to people.
Right.
At least the government is now finally moving in the right direction.
Right. So, do you think a lot of people are saying it's discriminatory for people from non-visa waiver countries, considering that they are prioritizing tourism. They want tourists to come, those on working visa holidays to come, but
Yes.
not. people, migrant families who have been separated. The reuniting families should be the priority. So, what do you have to say?
Well, it is definitely discrimination. I mean, you have all these different categories and types of people that want to come. Now,
Hmm.
the government has limited resources in being able to process things. We've seen that. We've
Hmm.
seen how the government's made promises. We're going to process these applications, and skilled migrant category
Hmm.
applications is the classic. People have
Right.
had their applications for up to 3 years.
Hmm.
So they have to pick and choose. And look, I can understand why they're doing it, because while it causes a continuation of the stress for the families who've missed out at the moment, is the
Hmm.
government's decided to prioritize the economy and
Right.
people who are coming. The reality is that they will come, and the huge majority of them will leave after they've done their tourist trip to New Zealand.
Right.
And when I was minister, one of the problems have with having open visas, for visa-free countries, is those countries are the ones we're confident that people are not going to overstay.
Right.
And I'll give you an example. Indonesia used to be visa-free
Hmm.
when I was the minister. Then all of a sudden, there was all this crackdown by the Indonesian government on Chinese Indonesians, like a
Hmm.
pretty bad crackdown, arresting
Hmm.
people, jailing them. And all of a sudden, we were getting all these Chinese Indonesians wanting to come here, and as soon as they arrived, claim to be refugees. And
Uh,
so I agreed with Immigration New Zealand, and we immediately cut the visa free status for Indonesia, which I don't think has ever been reinstated at this stage. So
hmm.
those are the issues. And many of the people, when they come here as tourists from certain countries, they have no plans of going home again.
Right.
Yet I understand here, most of the work visa holders that are here, or the student visa, their long term goal is to gain residency. And
Right.
um, but yeah, look, it's all I can say is we're making progress. We are moving forward. Finally, I mean, for two
Right.
years, there,
Right.
there has been no light in the end of the tunnel.
Right. Moving on, there has always been a demand from people who are stuck overseas who had visas that they wanted to come back, or they had, or people who just got stuck overseas saying that their work visa should be
Mm.
extended, like Australia did. So,
Yes.
what is your take on that?
Well, I think that's the biggest moral issue.
Hmm.
Okay, and I think the government has handled that badly.
Okay.
And people had visas. They've gone home for a holiday, or
Mm,
mum rushed back because some of the family was sick. Then all of a sudden, in March, we closed the border. And look,
right.
I understand why the border was closed, and I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem with is that the current government, the current minister, Christopher Foy, has closed his eyes and won't address that issue. And I think that is immoral, unethical, and they should have addressed those people. I mean, some of these poor people, they had houses here, they got cars, everything's here. They rushed back for a 2 week holiday, and they haven't been able to come back. Yet they're still paying rent, or required to pay rent. And that's just that, there is no moral justification for the government not to address that issue. And yes, I agree. I think all of those people um, should have been allowed in before, or at the same time, at the worst, as these
Right.
visa-free people.
Right. And moving on, there's also a demand of the living. We always have debates, especially with Indian migrants, about the living together condition that one needs to fulfill for the partnership visas. As we know, especially in Indian culture, living together is not permitted before marriage, unlike the Western countries.
Mm.
And even now, when they announced that partners would be able to come in July, they had this condition saying that only those who meet the living together condition would be able to meet. So, do you think there needs to be a change in the way living together is seen by Immigration New Zealand?
The law and the policy itself doesn't need to change, because for temporary applicants,
Mhm.
um, there is no minimum living together requirement. You go through the policy. the living requirement, as far as the minimum time, is only for residency. That's 12 months.
Right.
What you have to do is convince Immigration New Zealand you're in a genuine, stable relationship, and we've made special. Excuse me, just moving. Made special conditions, if you like, for culturally arranged marriages, but there is no minimum time frame. So technically, in terms of the law, as soon as you enter a genuine, stable relationship, you're
Mhm.
entitled to the visa.
Right.
And this is what annoys me, and this is what has led complaints to the ombudsman, which the ombudsman has held up.
Mm-hmm.
And you have these immigration officers. I mean, they go straight into it and say their starting position is this relationship was a fraud.
Right.
I'm going to do what I can to decline it. And that's just wrong, morally wrong, ethically wrong, legally wrong.
Right.
And yes, I understand there have been, and I've seen a lot come across my desk as you look at certain relationships and it's a load of rubbish.
Right.
And but at the end of the day, you're not, as an immigration officer, you're not allowed to paint every Indian applicant as one of those people. You
Right.
have to have an open mind because, look, the majority of the relationships are genuine.
Right.
Um, but it's this sort of thing that Immigration New Zealand do. They go out and characterize certain people from certain countries,
Right.
and
Right.
that's
Which
just
again comes to discrimination.
very much so,
Right.
very much so.
Right. And moving on, right now it seems that the whole energy of immigration New Zealand is dedicated to the one-off residency, the phase two, phase one. But
Hmm.
nobody's talking about what is happening to the, skilled migrant category. When will that open? A lot of people who have not been able to get residency through this path, they're waiting to know what are their other avenues. But this government doesn't seem to have more options for those right
Well,
now.
right now there is no avenue. Yes, you can put in your expression of interest, but it'll just sit there forever.
Right.
And it's frustrating because what's amazing, one of the things I find amazing is there's people, and this includes Indians as well, who've come to New Zealand, they've studied, they become doctors and nurses in New Zealand, but they miss out on those three criteria of
Yeah.
settled, they weren't here long enough, they still not working, whatever. They're now doctors and nurses. In Immigration New Zealand, the Minister of Immigration says, no, no, we're not going to let you in on this 2021 residence visa. You can wait till next time. Well,
Yeah.
that is crazy nonsense
Mm.
because why are we doing all these things? Because of COVID.
Right.
If COVID takes off, and it's taking off right now, we've had what, over 20 deaths in the last couple of days. The graphs of cases has gone like this. Now the
Mhm.
deaths are going like that. And who do we need?
Doctors and
We need
nurses.
doctors and nurses. And Chris Foy is looking at the problem a bit like Lord, Admiral Horatio Nelson, with looking through those binoculars with his blind eye. I mean, I
Right.
just find it amazing that Chris is doing that, and Jacinda. I mean, for
Right.
goodness sake, if you're going to let anyone in here right now with the way COVID's going, it's doctors and nurses.
Right. And because of all this, the immigration criteria, and also then you had MIQ earlier, that global image of New Zealand has taken a back seat. A lot of people are now not preferring to come to New Zealand for reasons like these, and they prefer to go to Australia or to Canada. So, do you think that there's where the New Zealand will lag behind in the race?
Um, yeah, I think there's an element of that at the moment because there are people, in India who want to go overseas to study.
Hmm.
And if our borders are closed, they'll go somewhere else. But
Right.
once we reopen, I'm pretty sure we'll come back fairly strongly because the ideal destinations, I think, for most Indians, uh, England, Canada, USA, Australia, New Zealand. We may rank fifth out of those countries, but in the day, as soon as we reopen, they'll come. And for no other reason, there's always a little boy out there in Mumbai and says, I want to go to New Zealand because I'm going to be the next Ajaz Patel. I'm going
Right.
to grow up, go back to Mumbai or Delhi, and I'm going to take 10 wickets in one innings.
Right, I get. And before we wind up, what do you think are the priority that this immigration and the government should be taking right now if they want to better the situation that migrants, the anxiety, the stress, to remove all that? What are the three things that this government should be focusing on right now with respect to border opening and with respect to immigration policies?
Well, I know they're going to reopen October, so they say. I personally, if I had the choice, I would immediately prioritize first all of those people who had visas,
Mm.
who were offshore. I would immediately grant them, extend their visas, reinstate them if necessary, through to the at least the end of this year. Give them priority to come back. I
Mhm.
would, and I'll do them first. The next ones I would prioritize before I let anyone else in would be to prioritize the families of, long-term work visa holders, students that are in New Zealand. I mean,
Mhm.
if you've been in New Zealand for, say, 2 years, then I would prioritize the processing of your family's visas.
Mhm.
And then that's just the morally right thing to do.
Right.
A bit lacking, unfortunately, at times in the government on
Right.
this.
Mhm. Right. And I think also the government needs to think of what are the other avenues that they can give for residency. They have just blinded themselves by saying that we have one off, and everybody is just focusing on that, but they're not thinking that in July, after this whole one off things will go over, what other people would do.
Mm.
Right now,
Well,
there's no avenue.
yeah, well, you're right, Navdeep. If you remember 2, 3 years ago, the government's we're going to do this big rethink about skilled migrant category.
Hmm.
And yes, a lot of rethinking need to do. They kept saying, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And then really, finally, 30 September last year, the government says, oh, it's all too hard. We'll just give 165,000 people residency. And look, that's great for those people. But as you say, what about the future? What are you doing in the future? Because ANSCO is not fit for purpose, never has been.
Right.
And I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but back originally, they had the list of unskilled occupations.
Okay.
And the one that was just so hilarious was that immigration officers were considered by the government, by the minister, to be unskilled.
Okay.
And of course, most of your listeners out there were saying, yeah, well, that's proven to be true, hasn't it? But as former minister, I was just outraged. How dare you, Mr. Minister, government, rate your own officers as being unskilled? To be a competent immigration officer is a highly skilled occupation.
Right.
And I've talked to a number of immigration officers, and they just felt, you know, bad that the government considered them unskilled. So yes, they need to come up with something. And they,
Right.
sure enough, they've had 4 years to work out how to do it. But yeah, what will they do? I don't know. I wish
Right.
I did.
Right. I hope things get better for people who have been waiting to come to New Zealand or reunite with their families. Hope things get better for them. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
No, thank you, Navdeep, and enjoy the rest of your day. And same to all the listeners.
Yes, you too, sir. Thank you so much for your precious time. So that was Mr. former Immigration Minister Tuariki Delamere talking to us about the border announcement, what he thinks of it, and what are the priorities that this government should have with regards to reuniting families and for those who are stuck overseas with visas and some without visas. Please do keep watching indianweekender.co.nz to get all the latest news.